If that hasn't gotten people to wake up yet, what will? Wake up and realize these people don't care about you. The Libertarian Party is the only party that actually cares about your rights to liberty and freedom. What's up, North Carolina, and welcome back to the Liberty Inc. podcast, your source to all things liberty in North Carolina. And today we've got a special guest. It is not someone local to North Carolina, but you may recognize this person. He's the person that we could have had as the vice president right now if America had any degree of critical thinking. He is Tasha's husband and the man who was born exactly 69 days after 420, Mr. Spike Cohen. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, Mike. I appreciate it. And I'm not local to North Carolina, but I am like Myrtle Beach is right there. Like I might as well be local to North Carolina. Dude, I'm almost within earshot of North Carolina.
It's funny. My wife is from North Carolina. I'm originally from Florida, which I'm glad North Carolina was able to beat my home state in the Spike swag bags. By the way, I couldn't participate until we beat Florida. But once you beat my home state, then I had to buy a swag bag. And we took the lead up at that point, at least as far as the convention. But I've been here in North Carolina for a long time. My wife's a North Carolina girl, and the beach we always go to is Myrtle Beach. So I'm just west of Charlotte. We're right on the border. You're just a neighbor to the south, man.
It's an extension of North Carolina for all intents and purposes.
Well, it was Carolina at one point, right? Where it was all one.
That's correct. So it's local in a broader sense.
Absolutely. Well, Spike, there's one trend that I kind of ask everybody. I know we're only 9 episodes in, but I think, I'd be remiss if I didn't start the podcast by asking you the same question I've asked the 8 other guests. And that is, most of us come from some kind of background in the Uniparty, right? Either we were raised to, and then at some point, we all kind of had different things that woke us up to the ideas of libertarianism and then ultimately brought us to the Libertarian Party. And Spike, I'd love to hear yours, man. What brought you to libertarianism and then ultimately, to running for VP?
So what brought me to libertarianism first was just being completely disabused of all of my ideas and notions up until that point. So I used to be a neocon.
Right.
And I was 19 when 9/11 happened. And I was, I'd never, experienced anything like that. I had no real context. I didn't understand the historical, what had led up to that. I just knew we were being attacked. I was scared. The media and government were telling me that that there was this, terrorist group that hated us for our freedoms, and they were trying to spread radical Islam around the world. And I thought, well, that's terrible. We need to do everything we can to stop them. And so over the years, I fell directly into the neocon, New American Century. It's funny. I've been reading Scott Horton's new book, Enough Already, and literally all the stuff that they're talking about, I was like, yes. Like all of the things that are happening, I was like, yes, this is great. And, there were these really annoying libertarians that would they were sort of conservative adjacent. And so there were people like Matt Kibbe and Ron Paul and others who would, they kept saying, if you want a small government that with low taxes and low regulations, you're not going to get it from an empire that, surveils your every move at home without a warrant and reserves the authority to hold you indefinitely without trial in a foreign country and, torturing you and all this stuff. And I'm like, no, you don't get it. We got to beat the Muslims or whatever I said. And so what ended up happening was over time, every prediction they made about here's how it's actually going to go. We're not going to be treated as liberators. We're going to be treated as occupiers. Documents are going to come out showing that they lied about, the pretext for why we even went to war. And, then I started reading about, some of the things like Operation Ajax and some of the things that led to all the nightmares that were happening in the Middle East. Yeah. And over time, I thought I was getting really angry. And I thought, you're angry because they're right and you're wrong. And that sort of, I was like, you don't have to be wrong. And so over time, I started thinking, well, if I'm wrong about this, what else am I wrong about? Sure. And so I started looking into, what it is I believed. And I read all sorts of different stuff. I read everything from the typical, Hazlitt, Mises, Rothbard, Basquiat, Hayek type stuff. Yeah. I even read some Marx and Kropotkin and Konkin and stuff like that. And, going through all of that, and reading everything, I really, I sort of took this gradual trip from neocon to, constitutionalist, traditional conservative, classical liberal minarchist, and now I'm, a radical anarcho-capitalist libertarian. And it was sort of there wasn't really a single moment. I guess the one moment was just me realizing you're mad because they're right.
Yeah.
Like, stop being mad for something so stupid. Like, they're right, you were wrong. You're young. I was in my 20s at this point. It's like, it's okay to be wrong at any point. You just learn from it. You don't have to keep staying wrong if you know you're wrong. So that sort of took me on the journey to liberty.
Yeah, you and I are about the same age. I was born in 1982, so you said you were 19 at 9/11. I was about the same age, right?
Yeah.
And it's funny where I guess I came from kind of a mix, right? My mom was a Democrat. My dad was a Republican. I think they were both pretty independent, right? But I grew up in the most liberal county in Florida, Broward County.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
I mean,
yep. No, I know Broward.
Yep. Broward County is, the bluest of blue counties in Florida. And I mean, so much so that, my mom was working with an attorney at the time who was best friends with Bill Clinton. So I met when I was, a 16, 17-year-old kid, the president of the United States here in a blue county. So, I mean, I grew up that way and kind of came from the left, right? But I'm a financial advisor by trade. So as a result of that, you tend to have to study economics, and that really kind of hit me as a clash where I kind of looked at it. And that's why I tell people, like, I'm, kind of ashamedly, but I voted for Republicans. I voted for Democrats. I voted for, I voted all over the place before I finally decided I was a libertarian. And I like that, right? That's the one thing that when I look at the Libertarian Party, there's a place for everybody, whether you came from the neocon side, whether you came from a really, left-wing side. Chances are, like what I found is you're going to find something within the libertarian platform and libertarianism that's going to resonate really, really good with Democrats and Republicans.
For the vast majority of people. For almost everyone has at least that one or two things that they hear what we have to say and go, yeah, that makes sense. Which is why, and this is why, Mike, I tell folks, first of all, remember, we have very few second and third generation libertarians. Almost all libertarians are like you and me. We started as something else. We made our way here at some point. We need to be welcoming. It doesn't mean that we let them come in and change our beliefs or change our platform, but welcome them in, because more than likely, when you first looked at libertarianism and went, you know what, that makes sense, you still had all these other things that you thought government was good at, or that libertarianism didn't make sense on this thing because you weren't consistent yet. Right?
I'm still in the minarchist phase, like on my way to anarcho-capitalist. But
here's the thing. I'm not even going to pretend that the only consistency is anarcho-capitalism or anarchy or anything like that, because I understand the argument of, even though I don't necessarily agree with it, I understand the argument of, well, you have to have some level of authority, of political authority, or else it's going to devolve into warlords or whatever. And again, we could disagree and discuss and debate that all day long, but that's still consistent libertarianism. We may have a disagreement on what's necessary at that finer point, but the reality is libertarians can't even agree on what 100% libertarianism even is. So, we can drop that for a second. We need to, or especially now where, we're being vastly outnumbered by, people who haven't even heard our ideas yet. But if someone already agrees with us wholeheartedly on something, let's reach them there, and then we can start discussing all the other stuff. And let's welcome them in, because the reality is most people, even libertarians, we tend to forge our beliefs based on our social circles, right? So bring them into our social circles. Like, if I know that someone is more likely to adapt my ideas if they're, more associated with me and in my circles, why would I push them into circles that disagree with what I think? Like, why would I not bring them in? I mean, again, assuming this isn't someone that's advocating for genocide or some terrible thing like that, or someone who's just like a bad person, who's assuming they're a good actor, bring them in. Say, let's talk about our disagreements on immigration or healthcare or gun rights or whatever. Let's talk about those things. The more they're around us, the more they enjoy their time with us, the more our ideas consistently make sense with what they already agreed with us on. the more likely they are to adapt all of our ideas. We see it time and time again when people join the party and the movement. They come in going, yeah, this sounds good.
And in the meantime, like, while they're there and while you're kind of bringing them on board with other ones, you can be an advocate for those things that we agree on, like those core libertarian values.
We can
whether you're very, very radical, very pragmatic, or anywhere in between. If you can come in and there's certain things like, there's some core libertarian principles, right? The non-aggression principle. How about ending all foreign wars and military intervention? Like, that's something, I don't care where you are on the spectrum of libertarianism. Like, that's an idea that, I find resonates with people on the left and the right, even, like people who consider themselves Democrats and Republicans. So if you can bring them in there and, we don't get, maybe our vision of Ancapistan, I'd be perfectly fine not having that vision right away, but working towards it and getting some baseline liberties, ending the wars, ending government intervention in currency and business. That's the thing that terrifies me, like, in my career, right? I help people retire, building a pool of assets they've been working hard their whole life for. They're within a few years of retirement. Meanwhile, you have the federal government printing trillions of dollars. Like, who does that inflation hurt? Like, I look at it as like this, this little old lady who was just widowed who's hoping to live on this for the next 20 years. I'm horrified of that. And I feel like libertarians should be able to unite around that as well. And I feel like we could get some both Republican and Democrat support on some of them if we just keep the ideas there. And like you said, man, get together on what you agree on, discuss peacefully and
of course,
friendly the other ones. So no, that's
and be
awesome.
like you said, working on the things we already agree on in the meantime, because it's one thing to say, yeah, come here, let's go argue about the stuff or discuss the things we disagree on. It's way better to say, oh, okay, you already agree with me about decriminalizing drugs or ending the wars overseas or monetary policy on reforming monetary policy or ending the Fed or reducing or eliminating taxation, whatever. Okay, great. Let's go work on that. Let's work on that on local initiatives. Let's work on that on advocacy. Let's work on that on whatever, running candidates that are going to run on that. Whatever. Let's go work on that. When you work with people on a regular basis, and especially if I'm going into a space where the vast majority of people believe something and we're working on something that we all agree on, then I'm more than likely going to start, adapting to the other things they believe. Not because we're browbeating them, but because it's just making more sense to me. Yeah. I'm taking cues from my social circles. And in the midst of all that, I keep hearing them talk about these other things. We have discussions about these other things. And I go, well, that's completely consistent with what I already agree with them on. So, libertarianism being a consistent ideology is why we don't have to worry about the marketing once they're here. All we have to do is get over that hump of them thinking whatever they think about libertarians or not even knowing about libertarians. And once we cross that hump and bring them in, now they're going to, they become adapted to our ideas. Very rarely do you hear of someone saying, I used to be a libertarian, now I'm X. Right. And usually it's because even if they've left the party because they, we don't win enough or because there was arguments or disagreements, they're still libertarian. They just may not be associated with us anymore. Right. Because the ideas are that powerful. Every once in a while I'll see, I used to be a libertarian, then now I'm a Republican or Democrat. But for every single one of those, I see 50 or 100 of, I used to be a Republican, now I'm a libertarian. I used to be a Democrat, now I'm a libertarian. Like you and me. I mean, people tend to come to liberty, not away from it.
Yeah, no, that's spot on. And one of the things you talked about, so for anybody who wasn't there at the North Carolina convention, Spike was our keynote speaker, which one was great. My wife came with me. She's really pretty apolitical, right? She's considers herself an independent, and really she's just focused on her job, being a mom, those kind of things. Doesn't really care about politics.
Most people.
But me being, I was just really excited about getting involved within local Libertarian Party, right? Because I think that's where most of our efforts are really best spent. And you talked about that in your speech there. And I remember, here's my wife who never really doesn't care about politics. And she was blown away by your speech, right? It's just a normal person who, doesn't really identify with any of the parties. I would describe her beliefs as probably more on the conservative side. But she heard you speak about, the government and then local activism. And that was really inspiring to me. And I think That's one of the things that I'm inspired. Like, I haven't announced it, but I'll announce it right here. I'm going to run for my county board in 2022.
Yes.
Yep. And I was talking to Brent DeRitter, and I don't know what your schedule looks like, and I hate to put you on the spot, but he said that if I'm running there, it may, if it lines up with your schedule, maybe we do some kind of event, go knock on doors here in Gaston County, North Carolina. He said we should be able to make that.
We should be able to make that work. Now, is your election this November or next?
No. So I was considering running for mayor this November of my little town, which I think is an extremely winnable race. I think our last mayor won with like 200 votes. Right? Like it was, I mean, there's 3,500 people in the town. I'm on the board of an HOA of 170 units. So, I mean, even if I just rally like my neighborhood and get a little bit of support, knocking on the rest of all of the other neighborhoods in town, I really feel like that's winnable. But with where I am, like I'm bringing on a partner in my business, a bunch of things. I'm like, I just can't do it this year. But county elections are next year. So I said when I was talking to like Susan Hogarth and some others, like, I want to run for office pretty soon. And next year, I know we've got kind of county board level elections. And, one of the things there where I thought, and this was one of my thoughts, and I'd love your advice on it, was, mayoral elections in my town are nonpartisan, right? Which some can say helps. I kind of have this feeling like I want to run as a libertarian. Like I want that L there because I feel like just to me, that means that I've reached out to my local community enough to vote for them that they look and say, okay, this is a libertarian, but he's saying things that resonate with what I believe in. So that's my my thought there. What are your thoughts on like local candidates? How do we build them up? What should we be doing? And at the local level, we want great candidates like you running for president and vice president. But I still think the path is local, and you talked about that in your speech. So what should we be doing at that local level?
Well, first of all, Mike, yes, I endorse you, and I would be happy to. We'll be able to make that work, especially because I was concerned when you said, I was making sure it wasn't this November because it would be kind of tough. I'm booked out through October at this point, so it would be tough to get in there, even though you're in North Carolina. But we're talking next November.
Yes.
We'll definitely be.
I know. I know John Stafford Stanley was on the podcast last week, and he's running for Board of Aldermen in Kernersville. And I know that, Brent's helping him, a couple others. So, I know he might be one of the ones on your schedule for that time. But yeah, I'm planning on next year at the county level.
Good. So, my thought about local races in the broader sense is, and I said this in my speech in North Carolina, I pretty much said it everywhere I go. The there are actually three main reasons why we should be focusing locally. Yes, we still need to run presidential and gubernatorial and senatorial and congressional candidates, if only for ballot access reasons in many states. And also because those races are kind of the messenger races, right? Like how many people, even though Ron Paul was never going to get his party's nomination, he was never going to be able to be president, how many millions of people has he brought into the liberty movement because of his debate performances? So there's something to be said about just being out there. I've met a ton of people who said that they become libertarian because of something they saw Gary Johnson say during debates or during his campaign. It's weird. In the last few weeks and couple months, I've started hearing people say it was me that brought them to libertarianism, which is kind of mind blowing. But
there are a lot, and I've talked to them. So I mean.
No, it's just incredible. It's just weird because you're used to like, oh, it was Ron Paul. I'm like, yeah, Ron Paul and Matt Kibbe and others were. But then someone's like, it was you, and I'm like,
yeah. There's a younger generation that doesn't know who Ron Paul is, and like,
I know it's
watching those great YouTube videos. So
I'm just adjusting, okay. But so anyway, so that's important. But here's why we need to focus local. Number one, we're already winning there. Yeah. Even with our, I think skewed focus on national races, we're already winning in local races, which means if we dial that support up and kind of retune our focus on local and regional races, we can win way more of them. We can win hundreds or thousands. We've already got hundreds of elected officials across the country. We can make that thousands. We can have thousands of city council people, county council people, mayors, sheriffs. There's a big one.
Libertarian judges, elected judges.
Libertarian elected judges. We could have many more state legislative reps and senators. There's all sorts of things that we can do. And in doing that, we can already start making real changes now. Okay. Here's the other reason. You are far more likely to be affected by a local or statewide law or decision than you are by a federal one. The federal stuff's important, but on a day-by-day basis, it's much more likely to be a local or state or county cop who is enforcing a local or state or county order or law or rule or bylaw or whatever. That's more likely to affect you on a day-to-day basis. So when we get into those places of power, we're immediately and acutely affecting people in a positive way, including ourselves.
Yeah.
And then the third reason is most people aren't early adopters. So you know that really frustrating thing where people go, well, I'd vote Libertarian, but you can't win.
Yeah.
And we're like, we'd win if you voted for us, right? But what they're saying is, I'm not going to vote for you unless I already think there's a good shot of you winning. No, I don't care about your argument that there is no such thing as a lesser evil. No, I don't care about your argument that if I voted for you, you'd already win. I'm not going to put my neck out and see.
Yeah.
But if we can show them that we are winning, right? If instead of going, yeah, we'd win if you voted for us, if instead we'd say, yeah, but we are winning. We're winning all sorts of local and regional and statewide races, and look at all the great stuff we've been doing. You're going to start peeling off support from people who go, yeah, I'll give you a chance. At the very least, they'll vote for you in those races because they know you can win them, right? And over time, again, using that whole concept of bringing them in, as more and more voters vote Libertarian, as more and more voters see that Libertarianism actually works, it's not just some, ideological pipe dream. It actually is good governance, and see how that works on a day-to-day basis at different levels. Now, not only do they go, yeah, you know what, they could win this, I guess I'll vote for them, but more and more, they start to not care if you can win because they see that you have the best ideas. You can turn them into early adopters. Not all of them. Right. Some of them are literally not going to vote for you unless you're already polling as the winner, right? You have to be getting 35 or 40% in a three-way race, and they'll go, all right, yeah, fine, I'll vote for them now. Those are the final snowball people that, like, they're just not going to come in until there's already a dog pile there like that. And that's a lot of people.
It is.
But you can start to peel people off by showing them that our ideas work, that we can win, and that all we need is just to be able to work our way up to the higher levels and do even more good.
Yeah, I mean, that's awesome. And it's funny. I was a couple episodes back, I actually had John Mons on, right, who was another speaker there at the North Carolina convention.
Yeah.
And
no, John's great. He's one of my favorite people.
He was talking about the Free County Project really, like, briefly during the convention, and I said, man, I got to get John on here so that we can spend an hour talking about the Free County Project and the ideas there. And we ended up going like an hour and a half, right? Like, there was just so much to talk about there. But that idea of, like, everyone who says, libertarians, it's all theory, right? Well, if you're in baseball and you never get an at bat, your batting average is always zero, right? Where John, that whole idea of, let's get one county and turn it gold, where you've got the sheriff, you've got the elected judges, you've got a majority there, and then all the neighboring counties are going to look over and be like, man, their property taxes are a third of what ours are. Like just little things there with the idea of growing it.
And their schools are better and more dynamic, and their infrastructure is better than ours, and their crime's lower, and they aren't having any real complaints of abuse of authority, and their prisons are emptying, and their jails are emptying, and their drug abuse rates are nothing, and they don't have an opioid epidemic anymore, and all these amazing things are happening there, and businesses are flocking there to this county. I love the Free County Project idea. The Free State Project idea was to pick they went with New Hampshire, but a small population state, and basically take it over in the same fashion. Yeah. The problem is we don't have the kind of numbers to do that. No. We don't have we have the numbers, but we don't have tens of thousands of people or hundreds of thousands who are willing to move to a state, right?
Or even able,
but,
right? If
or even able to.
Job,
yeah. But you could find hundreds of people that are willing to switch their residency to a specific county in their state. That's feasible. And if you do that, you now have a solidly libertarian county somewhere, and you can build upon that. There are probably in every state, there's probably a county where, the population's small enough where you could do that. And in some cases, it would literally mean just owning something there. You wouldn't even necessarily have to move there. You would own something there and be registered there and whatever, and register that as your main place of residence. I think it's a good idea. I really like the Free County Project idea. Going back to and by having the control of the school system, or really not control, by getting rid of control of the school system and allowing for free market schooling in that county, now you're raising up a generation of libertarians. right? You're starting that process from the beginning.
It's funny. I'm actually before COVID, I made the decision to homeschool my son for a year. I previously sent him to a private school. I've been blessed that I'm able to do that. But I decided, you know what, we're going to travel a little bit this year, and I'm going to homeschool. We did 1 year, and we basically, I just followed the exact same curriculum that that his private school was using. That way, the idea being, if he goes back the next year, he doesn't really miss anything.
He's still with it. Yes, that makes sense.
Same process, but this year we've actually switched. I looked at a whole bunch of different curriculum, and it kind of ties into that whole idea of multi-generation libertarians, right? And at the end of the day, I want him to be a free thinker, right? And if he falls in something other than libertarian, I'm okay with that, right? I'll probably just still have political debate with him when he's an adult. But after showing him a bunch of things, we actually decided, so for this year, we're actually going to be using the Ron Paul curriculum, which I thought was cool. I'm like, hey, there's this curriculum out here. But I looked at the landscape, and that was one of the things that John also talked about, like schools being one of the big areas where if libertarians are able to come in and actually show that our ideas work, where you have a rise of things like, teachers, right? Where a teacher says, I've worked for the public school system, but I'm going to set up a little neighborhood school of like 10 or 15 students, right? And however the financial structure behind it works, but chances are teachers could probably make more money in a capitalist society like that, where they're educating.
Easily. Easily.
The teacher comes out better. I feel like the student to teacher ratio is going to come out better, give more learning opportunities. Not even to mention like charitable schools and all these things that could function in that libertarian county if it does exist. Those are the kind of wins that I feel like, where I was excited, to see you as a VP candidate. But, when I look at things, I'm a thinker, right? I like to think strategy long term. And I look at it, a libertarian, president or even member of Congress could still be like 20 years away, right? We've been at this thing for 50 years as a party, right? But I look at it and say, if we get maybe like one gold county, and then people are, the news has no choice but to talk about that, right?
To cover.
Oh my God,
what's that?
What is this thing? It's presidential night. This county goes gold, right? What is this? But I feel like if you
even if it's
that,
just one,
even if it's just one, they have to report it.
Literally just one. Yeah.
But if that's the kind of thing that inspires more people, where maybe you don't have other counties that are going to get a libertarian supermajority, but I look at like the federal level. They're basically branding a large swath of libertarians as domestic terrorists, right? And turning the war on terror internal. And normies, like, normal Republican Democrats, they watch the news, they see this, they have this idea. But if your local town mayor or your local county representative is a libertarian and you engage at that local level, it almost becomes a counterbalance to that narrative that the national media is pushing out. Like they're saying, libertarians are these awful terrorists that want to destroy government. And meanwhile, you're like a regular person in, rural county somewhere, and you're like, I got an elected libertarian and my property taxes went down. He's not calling for anybody to do it. I feel like you kind of have to have this nationwide local revolution of local governance. That's what empowers. When people see, okay, I don't care what the media says, I know libertarians are trying to make things right because my local libertarian has made my life better. And that's kind of that thing where they look at it and say, because I look at this past year, right? And I was a little surprised that we couldn't get to 5% this year with Donald Trump and Joe Biden are probably two of like the most despised people on the planet at the time, with a lot of crossover of people who don't like either.
So here's the big issue that happened last year, Mike. In 2016, the media, the corporate media, it's pretty obvious that they were like, okay, Gary Johnson's a small government candidate and he's sane. And so we're going to put him out there and peel votes away from Donald Trump. And so they gave Gary Johnson and Bill Weld. And Bill Weld and Gary Johnson also had Beltway media connections. Right. Gary Johnson's a retired governor. Bill Weld also a retired governor. And Bill Weld had all sorts of Beltway clout. Had been a pundit in the Beltway media circles for quite some time. So they leveraged that. And then, of course, what happened was they got on, and Bill Weld in particular used it to vouch for Hillary Clinton and say how great she was. So that kind of blew up in their face that it was like, oh, they're going to come and take votes from Donald Trump. No, actually, they're not.
Not if you directly ask for it.
Right. Well, and that's the thing. So here's exactly what happened. Yeah. What happened was that they got a record amount of attention, which meant that they got a record number of votes and a record amount of donations and everything else. The media learned their lesson from that. So in 2020, they pretended Joe and I didn't exist. They would not cover us. They mentioned, major media mentioned Jo Jorgensen one time, and it was when she was bitten by a bat. Okay. And so that was put out there as this kind of like, look at this joke, she got bitten by a bat, and it backfired on them because a bunch of people were like,
who's that?
Oh, the Libertarians are running someone? Wow, that's interesting. Let me look into it. And then the other thing that happened was a lot of people heard the story and they're like, wait a second, a 63-year-old woman got bitten by a bat and she, without hesitating, got on the plane, went to do her campaign event, and then got her rabies shots? That's pretty badass, right?
Yeah.
So that ended up being a positive, even though it was like, oh, look, look at this goofball got bit by a bat. It actually helped us because it was like, well, yeah, that could happen. It wasn't her fault. She was bitten by a bat, and look how she handled it. And more importantly, people were just surprised to hear that they were hearing that there was a libertarian candidate for the first time. So that was a big part of the problem, is that they just didn't. If someone's running for president and vice president and the people that are covering these things don't mention it, did it happen? And that was the problem. I was hopeful that we'd at least, do as well as Gary and Bill did, if not do better. But especially coming into October and realizing they were going to continue just not pretending we didn't exist, I knew that the numbers were going to be bad because, when they would do polling of us, the vast majority of people said they didn't even know who we were. When they would give positive, negative polls, they'd say, I don't know. Like, I'm sure. I have no idea, like, who it is. So that was a big part of the problem.
I mean, you look even like with trending hashtags on Twitter, right? Like the whole thing, when you look at, and I get into this where, with the same people, Republicans and Democrats were like, you can't win there, but like, let her speak. That was trending so hard on Twitter with massive numbers. It seemed like every libertarian, it had massive amplification. And when something, it doesn't matter what it is, when something is trending that hard, normally the media picks it up because they're like, oh, this is trending, we're going to hop on it and cover it regardless of what it is. If we could put our ideology in it, but it's going to get us clicks because it's popular, right? They ignored it. Like they completely ignored it. And the whole thing where people, even at the national level, like getting into debates where it's like, you've got this 5% threshold, but the bullshit that I saw there, they were using polls where you and Joe weren't even options on the poll. It was a binary choice poll. How can you get 5% if you're not even on the poll? And that's the kind of thing that I really think, even if someone's not ready to be a libertarian, right? Like that's an issue that if libertarians could rally around, right? I feel like, you're going to have your diehard partisans, right, on both sides that are going to be like, no, we don't care if we're doing shady shit to keep libertarians out of the debate, right? But I feel like there's some good-natured Republicans, good-natured Democrats who are like, they should be at least on the polls that are considered for whether they get to debate, right? Like
I think that's important to talk about, Mike, but there are those, and you may not be saying this, but there are those who believe we should center our message around that. And I don't believe we should. No. I think we should center our message around our solutions. Yeah. And then once we do that, then we can say, when people go, yeah, but why aren't you in the race? Why aren't you winning? We can say, because of this. This is why. Yeah. And here's why that shift is crucial. So imagine if I'm I'm selling a product to you and I knock on your door and you open the door and I go, hey, Mike, or I wouldn't know your name necessarily. I go, hey, my name's Spike Cohen and I'm here to sell you a fantastic product. And you go, okay, great. What is it? And I say, well, before I let you know that, I need you to know that no one will let me advertise my product on their network or on their social media. None of the catalog companies will carry it. I can't get covered by QVC or HSN. No one will do it. It's as if they just don't want me to let you know about this fantastic product. And you go, Okay, well, what is it? And I go, no, it's way worse than that. They've actually put laws in place to make it incredibly difficult for me to even be here to tell you about my product. And it's absurd. I mean, I had to spend all this money getting signatures just to be able to be allowed to have a license to come right here and tell you about my fantastic product. And you go, okay, great. What is it? And I go, no, it's way worse than that. The fact is that there is a cabal of powerful corporations that want to do everything they can to make sure that I don't let you know about this fantastic product I have. Basically, I can't even tell you about or sell you my product. And you say, well, Spike, it sounds like I can't buy your product and I can't sell you. You can't sell me your product. And I go, you son of a bitch. That's what happens when you lead with that message. Yeah. If you're constantly telling voters all the reasons why you can't win, they walk away with the message of they can't win. Even if they say, well, that's not fair, it's not right, it shouldn't be that way. The reality is we're basically messaging we can't win, 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 which is why I say focus. Yes, it's important to talk about those things.
Yeah, no, and I don't mean to lead with that like as a way to bring people to libertarianism,
yeah,
right?
No,
I just mean
all right.
When we're talking when we're getting into 2024, right? And there's that period where it's kind of leading up to it. I feel like that's an opportunity where, as far as our individual outreach, whether we're knocking on doors, talking to people, however it is, trying to bring them to libertarianism, I feel like that's one of the things that we should at least try to make as a fight, right? Early on, like if it's, hey, they're going to be polling to see who gets on the debate stage, we should still have our outreach targeted around our solutions. But I feel like that's an opportunity that if we make a big enough stink about it early enough there, that's something we should do to try to help get us there. Like, if we, as soon as we see a poll that comes out that this poll's being used to determine who's there, and you're not on it, despite being on the ballot in all 50 states, right? That's the kind of thing that I feel like we should be able to unify all libertarians around. Like, let's amplify the hell out of this and make it so big that they have no choice but to answer it. Maybe it's wishful thinking, and maybe they shut it down, right? So with tech companies saying, "Hey, we don't want people talking about this," but
so that I agree with. I think you can have a campaign where you can say, listen, these are all the things we're doing in your local community. These are all the things that we want to be able to do. And we have these people that are running for president and vice president, which, by the way, I think we should be picking our pick for president and vice president like way earlier than we do. May is unacceptable. Honestly, we should be doing it late the year before to give us time to go around. And when I say us, I mean activists, to give, the activists and the membership
even
time
the
to go out there and
like
push
your
the person.
And the 2020 had to be insane, man. Like
we had just over 5 months to campaign. It was absurd. Anyway, that's a whole other subject.
Yeah.
But if we were out there saying, listen, they're going to start asking in the polling who you want for president. Say that you want the Libertarian. Say that you want whoever it is that's running, right? Say that you want that, because even if they don't include that name, they have to put other. And so if they put out a poll that says, the Republican is polling at, 39% and Democrats polling at 41%, and there's 20 or 19% for other.
Yeah.
That has to get mentioned. Yeah. That has to get mentioned, that it's like, well, who's this other? And they'll have to start, because they're going to be pressure on, if 20% of the country is saying someone else, who is that? Yeah. And they're going to have to start including people. And that's how you end up on the debate stage. But I think, before I personally think they will always try to find a way to game it, which is again, why we have to focus locally, because the reality is this, Mike. By the time we are able to get on the debate stage, it won't be because we were able to trick their system. It's because they control the rules. They can always just knock it up from 15% to 20% or 30% or whatever they need to knock it up to.
Yeah.
But if we're already so heavily involved in local and regional politics that everyone knows about us, and that an increasing groundswell of people are saying, I don't care who else is running, I'm voting Libertarian, I like what I'm seeing and I want more of it, they can't ignore it.
Yeah.
I believe we will end up on the debate stage when they just simply can't ignore us, when 20, 25, 30% of the population is saying we want libertarians, where we're not having to even ask them to ask it, where it's just we're winning. I truly believe, I don't believe that libertarianism is going to come from the top down and in this trickle down liberty fashion. I think it's going to be, like you said, a grassroots movement across the country of individuals and of its local communities doing things like running candidates, Also, we don't have to wait for libertarians to get elected locally. There are libertarians across the country that are already lobbying the people that are in place right now to do things like end qualified immunity and end no-knock raids and end civil asset forfeiture and push for nullification laws for the Second Amendment and for immigration and for other Second Amendment. Right now, there's a big push for cities to nullify and be sanctuaries against lockdowns and mandates.
Well, it's these. You mentioned that. It's funny where I'm in Gaston County, right? And just actually yesterday, our school board met, and there was a group, right? And I'll be upfront. There's a whole lot of people who are traditionally Republicans in this group, but the group's sole purpose was to reopen businesses. Yep. And stop mask mandates and things like that. And I looked at that and I said, yeah, I'm a libertarian, but this is something that I'd get behind. And they actually showed up at the school board meeting, and Gaston County voted unanimously in spite of Governor Cooper's order that Gaston County schools are going to be mask optional, that it is going to be up to the parent and children and that's the kind of win where, it doesn't matter who's there. If you show up with enough people there that are local and outraged, local politics, as I mentioned when I looked at a mayor run here, 200 votes, right? If you have 50 people show up angry at a small town meeting, they're really going to listen to what those people have to say. Because if not, they're going to get voted out. Because if that, if they have a bad moment there, those 50 people, if they talk to 5 people each, now you've got 250, which is more than it takes to win a spot. Exactly. And sadly, anger motivates people more to vote than happiness. In many cases, it shouldn't be that way, right? Like, it should be idea based, and that's why the media does what they do, right? It's fear sells and fear moves people, and it's sad. But I look at it even locally as something that can come into play.
Yeah, if we can, I really believe, because I tell people, I'm like, yes, not when I say act locally. Not just run for local office. Go ahead and go to your city council meeting, your county council meeting, your state legislative sessions. Bring a few dozen people, and watch what happens. Because I've seen a handful of people go to state legislatures and make real changes because they had the best ideas. They were the ones in front of those representatives and senators, and they were going, all right, good, we'll do that, because no one else is showing up for that, right? Yeah. You show up with 10, 20 people at a city council meeting and push for something, it might get passed. And that's a real concrete change that's happening right then because 10, 15, 20 people showed up. So I'm a big fan. We need to organize. We need to be involved in our local communities. And every time we have one of these wins, even if it's the smallest little win, repealing some minor inconvenience of a tax or stopping a new one from being implemented or, getting rid of a mandate or creating a sanctuary against lockdowns or whatever it is, or even just decriminalizing or descheduling or deprioritizing drug enforcement in an area or something like that.
My county needs that so bad. My county.
Well, I live in Myrtle Beach, man. Like, trust me. It's
I looked at the lockup page, like 75 to 80% of all arrests in my county are nonviolent drug crimes. That's sad.
So imagine if you got 50 people together who went there and said, this is stupid, this is costing taxpayers a fortune, all these people are doing is building these criminal records, making it that much harder for them to get out of addiction. Why are we doing this? Let's treat addiction like a mental health issue instead of a criminal issue. Yeah. And let's say you were able to change that. And now all those people are free. They're not in jail anymore. And now they can actually get help and get clean. And if they don't get clean, then they weren't going to be clean anyway, but at least they're not in prison, right? So that's a change that can happen. And everyone who's watching that and seeing the addiction rates go down, the overdose rates go down, the safety go up, the crime rates go down, the taxes go down because there aren't all these people in jail all the time, all of that happening. And they go, wow, those libertarians were right about that. This is what can happen. And we don't have to wait for the libertarian messiah moment where millions of people come to the fold of liberty. It doesn't have to work that way. It can be dozens of people making a change in your immediate area. Yeah. And building upon that, building from there, and building to that major moment where it's not a messiah moment. It's a grassroots army of human liberty that has been steadily and methodically building their way up to the moment
and
when they're
showing
able to
results.
Take over the world and leave us alone and showing results all the way along.
Because at the end of the day, that's like the biggest thing. Like whether it's government, business, results you can't ignore, right? Like if all of a sudden something happened and it caused prices, some technological innovation caused energy prices to drop 30% across the board. Like, you can't ignore that. Like, it's just not possible. Like, even if the media ignores it, someone's like, holy crap, my gas is $1 cheaper, right? Like,
there's
people
no
are
ignoring
going to
it.
be, there's just no, and that's the thing, that if we could get things. Now, you said something I want to clarify on, because I know your schedule, so I want to keep things on track. But I before I get to my final question, you mentioned, and I think you've got a very unique perspective because you lived it. And I think about this as, look, North Carolina's coming up. We got Reno coming up. North Carolina still has to assign our delegates. So I think of it as an opportunity to speak to people who might be delegates from North Carolina. And you mentioned something that I agree with you on, in that choosing presidential and vice presidential candidates as late as we do is harmful to the movement. It's bad for the candidates that are in that position from your own mouth. So I look at it and say, our delegates in Reno have, the LNC has to change that. How much time would be good, as someone who went through that process as a candidate? When do you think, the LNC should choose our presidential and vice presidential candidates? What would be a good amount of time? And I just hope that this can weigh on any delegates here in North Carolina. I'd love to get Spike's thoughts on this as to why you might want to motion for this at an LNC meeting in Reno.
And so we're actually working on drafting a bylaws amendment proposal, so that and lobbying people across the country. So thank you for this opportunity, because this is going to be a push in Sparks when we go there in 22 to make this change, because it's absurd. I believe that at the very least we should be picking them before the holidays of the previous year. So like for 2024, it should be sometime in, like, say, early to mid-November at the latest of 23, so that we can go through the holiday season knowing who our candidate is. We can start going to places like the Iowa caucuses, the New Hampshire primaries, go into that with our candidate, going there, getting as much attention as possible. To this day, the most number of people I've interacted with campaigning was at the New Hampshire primaries, and I was some schmuck that was running for the Libertarian Party's nomination at that point. I did not have the nomination. This was February of 2020. Tens of thousands of people I saw. Thousands of people had their selfies taken with me and talked with me about things. And it happened over and over and over and over again. And it was because I was there. But I wasn't the actual nominee. Had I been the actual nominee, that would have gotten even more attention. I might have actually gotten some press.
Sure.
We're leaving so much money on the table, Mike. I was one of the ones who had to call after we got the nomination. They give me the list of, me and Joe, the list of the people that maxed out to the Gary and Bill Weld campaign. And I'd call them and I'd say, so, we've got our nominee. And they'd say, I gave that money back in December of 2019 or December of 2015 because I assumed that Gary was going to get it again because he had gotten it in 2012. I'm not giving you any money. I've never heard of you. And you have 5 months to campaign right now. There's no way I'm giving you any money. We are leaving so much money on the table. We're leaving so much time on the table. The reality of why the party chose to move it so far in advance was that the logic was, well, after the Republicans and Democrats have pretty much picked their candidate, we might be able to peel away some of their candidates.
I mean, and you said
that's not good. That's not good.
You said it, and you said at least, right, the holidays. Like, I think you need at least a year to campaign. Let's be honest. Democrats and Republicans are spending the entire 4 years campaigning with, I mean, the whole thing. So, and I agree. That's like the minimum, a year. What would be an optimal situation? Like, and I know that doesn't work this way, especially in getting things done at the LNC. But 18 months. If you knew something kind of the first half of the year before, is that? Is it because I guess there's also too much time. We don't have the coffers that the Republicans and Democrats do.
And it's less about the money, Mike, because you could, just because you have the nominee doesn't mean you have to start spending all this money, right? You can just start laying down the groundwork. But once you get much earlier than, say, Labor Day of the year before, now you start having the issue of, well, when are the state parties supposed to have their their conventions.
Right.
So it can start to mess things up if you push it back too far. I don't have a problem with us doing it the previous summer, but I can see the objections of like, that's going to be an issue. But here's the thing. The beauty of this is we can pick a have to have it by date with the idea that they can do it earlier if they want to, right?
Well,
like we can
and
say
on holidays, right? Like if you have it the year before, like when families get together that are dispersed across the United States, if they could go in and say, look, Spike Cohen is running for president here. I want to go, like, there's conversations that haven't happened over Thanksgiving, Christmas, and all of the other ones.
There's so much
there that if we had a nominee and could start that early and
we knew who our nominee was.
Seeds, so you're spot on with that.
Yeah. So we're going to be pushing for this. It's actually my wife, Tasha's been going to, when she's been to some of the conventions after they've picked their new XCOM, she'll go and make her plea. And she's like, as the wife of the candidate, I can tell you right now how difficult it was for us to be able to try to campaign everywhere in like 4.5, 5 months, right? Because so, and obviously there were even additional challenges because of the pandemic and everything else. But the reality is, every objection that I've heard to this, one objection I've heard is, well, how are we going to, potentially get Republicans who lost their primary to come join us and run for ours? We don't. No. We need libertarians running for libertarian office.
Not Republicans or Democrats running as libertarians.
Or I'll hear, it's going to cost a lot of money. No, you're leaving ridiculous amounts of money on the table. And again, just because you've picked your candidate doesn't mean you got to start spending millions of dollars right there. You just start building, who you have, and you start building your team.
Sure.
And then the other thing, because it took us weeks to get like our logo and website and merchandise up, like you have to give people time to do this stuff. And then, the big objection I hear is, well, that's just a lot of time for the candidate to have to take off. If you have a candidate who isn't willing to at least take a year off of their life to do nothing but this, then they're the wrong pick. I don't care if everything else makes sense. If they aren't willing to stay dedicated to this for at least a year, then pick someone else. Because you need someone who is going to be every single day fighting for this thing, right? Like I started running in December of 2019, and I already started doing outreach events like door knocking in Wilmington, North Carolina, and other events like that, going to New Hampshire during the primaries, because I was already looking past the nomination into actually trying to bring people in and get them to vote for it. And if the person that's running for the 2024 race isn't willing to spend at least a year campaigning in the general, then they're the wrong pick. Pick someone else. That's going to be a major push for us.
Well, I'm speaking directly to you. Delegates from North Carolina, if you like Spike, if you like what he had to say, I hope you will support the motion that comes forward for the bylaws change. And that you will pass that. And with that, Spike, you've been so generous with your time. It's kind of coming up on the time that we want to wrap it up. So I want to throw you my final question. This is what I ask everybody. And everybody who comes on here is a libertarian. So in general, we're against things like dictators and authoritarianism. But I want you to forget that for a brief moment. Okay. I want you to reach out and grab your crown, put it on your head, and you are supreme dictator of the United States. But you only have one decree. One and only one decree. You can create anything you want. You can end anything you want. But one wish as supreme dictator of the United States, what would it be, Mr. Spike Cohen?
Government no longer has any control over currency or banking. When you take away the ability of the government to decide what money is and what banking is, everything else they try to build falls apart. All of their empires fall apart. All of their economic gravy trains that they build for the cronies who put them in office, where they just hand off trillions of dollars to them, all that falls apart. All of their attempts to centrally plan every aspect of the economy, which leads to all the inequality and outcomes that we're seeing as a direct result, not of any kind of merit, but just them handing off and picking winners and losers, and creating barriers to entry for the poorest among us. All that goes away. All the wars on victimless crimes go away. All of the prison industrial complex, all of that goes away, because the only way they'll be able to do it now is if they can get us to agree that that's a good idea and voluntarily give them money for it. Their tax schemes go away. Everything falls apart. Everything falls apart if they don't control the money. So that would be my number one thing. Not just ending the Fed, but ending their involvement in currency to begin with. Currency is what the market decides it is, and that's it. And from there, you'll see, you know, you're a financial guy, you know this stuff.
Yeah.
You know, people's wealth will actually grow instead of recede. Like the actual value of their money will grow over time, or at least maintain its value. The government won't be able to, you know, just steal from you at will without you even knowing through inflation. They won't be able to build all their, you know, imperial empire stuff that they're doing. It will just be better all the way around. You will go from a currency that is based on a political calculation that is designed and intended to make you lose value over time, to one in which competing providers want to provide you with the best currency so that they have your business, which makes you the king in that situation. You're now the person in charge of the monetary system by virtue of the fact that you were the one being catered to, so that the value goes up. So that would be the number one thing I would do. And people who are not in liberty circles, they'll be like, you wouldn't end the wars, you wouldn't end police brutality, you wouldn't do that, you would. This ends all of that.
You pulled the loophole in the question, right? Where you really hit the loop of it. And I can tell you, I hate authoritarianism, but if that was what a dictator was promising me, I would vote for that dictator, and I don't care what letter they have after their name either. Like, because I understand that that one thing would be the linchpin that really dismantles all of the horrible things that we do. So, Spike, thank you so much for taking some time out to come on the podcast. You've been a fantastic guest. And we appreciate it. I hope that my state can support you in that, change within the bylaws at the LNC. I think that is a huge thing that local activists here in the state, I think Spike has laid out a very clear case for why this is something that we want our delegates supporting to give our candidates the best opportunity. We got some more episodes coming up soon. Going to be talking with Stephen DeFiore, who was our governor candidate. Going to be having an episode coming up on affiliate building, right? We have a lot of unaffiliated counties here in North Carolina. We want to affiliate a lot of them before the next convention. So thank you, everybody. Make sure if you're watching it on YouTube to hit the like button, the subscribe button, and we will see you next Sunday at 6 p.m.
And hit the bell. Hit the bell. Hit that bell. Next to the subscribe button, there is a bell. Hit the bell so that your phone blows up with notifications every single time this show goes live.
And we'll be easy. It's a once-a-week show, everybody. And you heard it from Spike Cohen himself. You got to hit the bell. So thanks so much.